Hi, so for my curriculum evaluation project, I looked into the main curriculum at my major placement in Guadalupe, and it's called Units of Study for Teaching Reading, and I pulled the first grade unit, and it's published by Heinemann in 2015. And a few of the key components are you have your first book, which is the foundational unit. So it's building good reading habits, and this is mostly what I'll focus on. Then you have these additional 3 books that help you teach fiction and informative texts. So there's 3 there. As well as this guide to reading workshop. So that teaches you, it gives you additional information and techniques on guiding the workshops and then the small group discussions. Then you have your if-then curriculum assessment book. And this kind of helps you assess where your students are at and gives you additional information as far as if they're not at the level you want them to be, what additionally you can add, or what can be added before you teach the lesson. Then you have these, finally, you have these 2 post-it notebooks. This one is for read aloud prompts, so you use these during your read aloud. And then this one is for your anchor charts, which is pretty much everything as far as models go. In this curriculum, it's all about the anchor charts. So these are all pre-made for every lesson. I looked into the research a little bit about anything backing this curriculum, and I wasn't able to find anything. I found some reviews from publishers, but as far as evidence backing it, there wasn't much out there. It could be because it's pretty young. And then I looked in What Works Clearinghouse, and it was not listed on there either. So I'll go ahead and go over the curriculum program evaluation sheet that was provided for us and what I rated each section. So for the first section, teacher preparation, I gave it an inconsistent because it does provide clear objectives. Well, it's like a little sentence that it gives you right there in the beginning of each lesson, and it also has you connect that with your students. It gives you a little section naming the teaching point, and that's where you tell your students exactly what the point of the lesson is. So that was 2 things that I felt could have been a little more meatier, but they were there. I was not able to really find a clear integration of skills across big ideas of reading or relates competency goals to objectives. And then also, as far as an advanced organizer goes, there wasn't anywhere that laid out exactly what is going to happen in this lesson and what happens during each of those sections. I did find this getting ready, and that kind of prepares teachers as far as materials go, what books to pull, and that kind of thing, and what materials, post-its you'll need and stuff like that. But nothing as far as an advanced organizer goes on what the lesson will include. And then the other nice thing that it does have was that it has these provides leveled books for instruction. So you have level 1, level 2, and then also level 3. So depending on where your students are at, you can pull a variety of books or a couple different books to work with. So you're not limited as far as that goes. So that's kind of why I gave it an inconsistent, because some of the parts were there, but not all of them. As far as teacher input and model goes, I also gave this an inconsistent, or this section an inconsistent, because it doesn't really provide an assessment of prior knowledge. It kind of just, it does go over a little bit of what happened in the previous lesson. But it mostly assumes that the child understood it and took it all in and that they're ready to go. There's no there's no area where it tells you if your child isn't understanding this or additional things you might want to add in case for more clear understanding. Let's see, provides models for students. Mostly it just depends on these anchor charts. It doesn't really provide many models. Provides meaningful examples and non-examples. Again, there's mostly anchor charts. And the examples that are given, they're mostly pulled from the student, from a conversation you're having with the student. So the way that this is laid out, and you'll see it more in my evidence, I think on here it'll be backwards probably, but it's mostly a conversation. So she'll talk about, when I was in the classroom and doing this with the students, I said this, and then I asked them to this, and they said that. And it's great, it's a good example, but the chances that your students are going to respond in the exact same way are really not, it's probably not going to happen. So when the student does provide an example, it's probably not going to be the example your student provides. So that's a little tricky. Directs teacher to have students respond in group and individually. Mostly the students are responding in group, and when they do, or when she prompts them to, she says readers. So she does that well. And then teacher provides meaningful feedback and error correction. She gives a little bit of feedback here and there, mostly positive feedback. But error correction is non-existent because in the way this is laid out, it assumes that your student is always going to give you the right answer or the answer that you're looking for. So, therefore, there's never any need for error correction in the lesson. So it doesn't ever tell you what happens if your student doesn't answer you, or what happens if your student says something completely off topic, or it just assumes that they're always going to say what you want to hear. And I think that is extremely unrealistic. So for those reasons, I marked it an inconsistent. There were some good aspects of it, but for the most part, really lacking on the teacher input and model. For the guided practice, I actually gave it a non-existent, so that was even more lacking. It doesn't ask the students a large number of questions, and it doesn't check their responses. Typically, she'll either ask them a question and they'll give the answer that she wants to hear when she asks them questions, or she'll ask a question and then she'll answer it herself as if she is the student to show the students how they should answer. So it doesn't really give a lot of chances for you to check all their students' responses. For guide student practice, lightly, she'll ask questions here and there, but mostly she does the talking. I keep saying she, but in the lesson, the teacher does the talking because it's a female author. Let's see what else is in this section. Provides scaffolding for difficult skills. I mean, as far as scaffolding, mostly it's just the anchor charts that break down things for you. But I really think there could be more scaffolding for sure. Teacher leads students by responding with them. She doesn't usually respond with them. She mostly gives them the answer or waits for them to give her the answer that she wants. Tests and checks for student understanding. Like I said, it's really lacking in that regard. Checks to obtain high success rate before moving on. It's kind of linked to the other thing. It really assumes that all the students are getting it and that they're all exactly where she wants them to be when she wants them to be there. And then when students do not meet mastery, additional examples are provided. Not really. Not within the lesson. I'm assuming, or I'm pretty sure that if you pull your if-then curriculum assessment instruction book, if you're really getting a feel that your students aren't getting it and you pull this, there's additional information, but within the lesson itself, it doesn't ever have you check. So for a first-year teacher, I could really see where this would be difficult, very difficult to use. So yeah, that was the reason why I gave it a non-existent, because for the most part, it was didn't have any of those key components that you really need to have an effective lesson for all the students involved. So for the independent practice portion, I gave an inconsistent as well, because requires and monitors independent practice. As far as the teacher goes, it seems as if she does no monitoring as far as independent practice goes. The student themselves will, in certain lessons, like the first lesson here, readers take a sneak peek to get ready to read. They make their predictions, and then they go, and during their independent practice, they read and check their predictions. So there, the student themselves are monitoring their progress. Or in lesson 3, where readers get stronger by reading more and more, she has them, during the independent practice, read and then keep track of their reading and how much they're reading. So the student is almost doing more of the monitoring than, well, they are doing more of the monitoring than the teacher, and that's not consistent through all the lessons. It's not always having the student monitor themselves. Students receive guided practice prior to independent practice. I mean, considering that the guided practice was practically non-existent, I would say that they don't really receive much guided practice before the independent practice. But she does do the teaching portion before she pushes them off into the independent practice. So that's important. And then independent practice aligns with guided practice. Yeah, for the most part, the activities that she has them do during the independent practice do directly relate to what she's teaching them, and then what they do during active engagement. So that is a positive, but for the most part, I gave it an inconsistent because it just does not follow the criteria of an independent practice, specifically the lack of monitoring the student's progress. I mean, that just really shocked me. So yeah, and then number 5, lesson follow-up. Directions to determine when to reteach, review, or introduce new materials. In every lesson in the beginning, they will review what happened in the past and kind of re-go over it. So that's pretty much the only time that you do that. And then you also introduce new material throughout the lesson. So she does do that, but it's not as much as I would like, especially with children with disabilities. I feel like you should be bringing back those things throughout the entire lesson, kind of reconnecting. And it just doesn't do that. It only does it in the beginning, and it's very light and quick. And then, let's see, skills are reviewed, maintained, and built upon throughout the lessons. Yeah, I mean, they do review it, like I said. They typically only review the lesson before, so they don't review, like, on the third lesson, they don't review the second and the first, they just review the second. So I could really see where students could get lost here, which is why I gave it an inconsistent, because even though they do lightly address those topics, it's not to the extent that I really feel they should be. And then finally, instructional enhancements. Using the Model E test format, really they don't. Lightly, I guess, a little bit, maybe. I'm trying to think about where I would have seen that, but I really don't think they do. I wrote light, if any, but I really think it's more like a no. Yeah, I'm going to go with no on that. Just because she's always leading the instructions. She doesn't really ask them ever to give answers, and when she does, the answers in the book are exactly what she wants to hear. So there's never that testing, there's never, she may model a little bit, but mostly she's just talking to them about what she wants and then expecting them to have obtained all that. And then responding with a signal altogether. She does have that, but again, it's light. I mean, she might use readers, do this, 3-4 times throughout the lesson. It's not as much as you would see in a typical direct instruction kind of lesson. Unison response cards, responding with signals. That, I mean, if anything, it's just these anchor charts. When you put up the anchor charts, you say, good habits for solving hard words. And then the students, point at it. Good habits for solving hard words. But that's really the only time that you're getting that responding all together. It really could be incorporated a lot more. And then format for error correction. Like I said before, there really isn't any, because within the lesson, there is no error. She never explains what happens when an error occurs. She just kind of assumes that they're going to give the answers that they gave when she did it this time when she made the book, I guess. It's just, I could see as a first-year teacher being, well, even as not a first-year teacher, being really overwhelmed by this. I guess that kind of leads me into the conclusion. As far as recommending it, I really would not recommend this curriculum to anybody if they asked. I hope that I don't get it in my first year. If I do, I'm really glad that I've been introduced to it. I also could see how having the cooperating teacher that I have, Miss L, I've seen how she uses it as kind of like a supplemental aid for her lessons. So it's not her main curriculum. She kind of has to make her own, because this does not work for children with disabilities. They found in Guadalupe that for the typically developing children, it does work. It has been shown to be successful, but for children with disabilities and English language learners, it's not, which is really a shame, because it's a significant amount of students in Guadalupe that are English language learners. And I actually was able to go to one of their professional development seminars on this curriculum, and it was in a 3rd grade class, and they were doing writing, but it was really upsetting how many. There was one kid who had it all down and was good to go. He had really absorbed the lesson. But there were several other children that were English language learners that only had the opportunity to speak to their peers for a minute. And that was not enough time to gather the information they needed from the lesson that was taught all in English. So what those kids had on their paper versus what, the English speaker, typically developing kid had on his paper was a huge difference. So this, while it works for those typically developing kids, it's not working for kids with disabilities or for English language learners, which unfortunately is a large population of that district and of several other districts in our area. And then, like I said, if I had to have this curriculum, I would definitely be adding a lot more direct instruction, especially when reading the text, because if my children are at the level that my children in my student teaching class are, they're not going to be able to read this. So they would really need a lot more direct instruction during reading time. I couldn't just have them read this independently or read it as a group and expect everybody to be getting it. Another thing is I would offer more examples and non-examples, a lot more of those, because with children with disabilities, you really have to reinforce that. And finally, something I thought of that, especially during lesson 3, where it's asking what kind of readers get stronger by reading more and more. And then in the independent time, it has them go off and pick books. I probably would have provided my students with a checklist of the type of books that we're looking for, how long they should be, at what level they should be, that kind of thing, instead of just, showing them the anchor chart and telling them, take off, do your thing. I would have really liked to have given them more concrete material to really look at and reference when making their decisions. So overall, I would not recommend this curriculum, and I hope I don't have to work with it in the future. But if I do, I'm glad I got to go to that workshop, and I'm glad that I got the time in this class to really look over it and see what kinds of things are out there, because I feel more prepared than I would have been my first year if I had just been handed this in Guadalupe and told to figure it out. Yeah. So thank you.